Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Grandstand Sports Data. Are you ready to take your March Madness bracket to the next level? Well, that's the big question. In today's video, we'll be revealing the secrets of the March Madness bracket and showing you how to pick a winner in the NCAA tournament without knowing anything about college basketball. We're going to break down the process of making picks to help you win your bracket competition. We'll go round by round looking at the best strategies and tactics to ensure you come out on top. And finally, we will then apply the formula to the current 2023 bracket. So sit back and get ready to learn all the insider tips you need to make your bracket a winner. So where do we start? Obviously, and most importantly, have an empty and updated March Madness bracket. Next, keep handy power ratings or adjusted net ratings when making your selections. So if you don't know, power ratings are numerical representations of a team's strength relative to other teams in the league, while adjusted net ratings measure a team's offensive and defensive performance relative to its opponents. So very similar stats, but I would say to pick one and stick one. You can find great power ratings over at kenpom.com, which a lot of people do use, or you can find your adjusted net ratings on sportsreference.com's college basketball page, which I will be working from when I show my demonstration. So let's get into it. So step one, let's pick your champion. Oh, so Anthony, this means we're working backwards, doesn't it? Not entirely. Only for the championship, we're going to select our champion, and then we will work from the first round on. So as you can see, we're going to look at some trends and some angles on how you select your champion. So the first bullet here, you always stay safe, or I can't always say always, but most of the time, stay safe and pick a 1 seed. The 1 seeds have won over 70% of national championships since 1985. That's basically since the tournament started, implementing 64 teams. Next, never pick the number 1 overall seed. This number 1 overall seed is only won 16.7% of national championships. Well, Anthony, if we're eliminating one of the 4 teams, one of the 4 1 seeds, how do I pick pick the champion out of the 3 others? Well, let's look at the trends. The trends here say that 94% of all champions ranked in the top 20 of offensive rating. So this shows us why we look at these net ratings. 94% of all champions ranked in the top 15 of defensive rating. So very balanced clubs from the first 2 statistics, as you can see. Next, and probably the more loose trend, is most champions have 4 players with at least 8 points per game, 3 players with 12 points per game, and 1 player with 15 points per game. Now, this isn't saying that they have 8 guys that can score. The guy who drops 15 points counts as one of the 4 players with at least 8 points per game. Just to make that clear. So next, let's determine the opening round upset since we selected our champion. As you can see on the left, we have our first round matchups. And then when we move to our right, we have the seeds win percentage for the first round since 1985, when the tournament expanded to 64 teams. On to the right, again, next we have the probabilities from the past tournament's results to help us identify how many upsets we should pick for those seeded teams. So for example, the 1 versus the 16. The 1 wins these matchups 99.3% of the time. Or as you may all know, since educating yourself the last few days to get ready for your bracket, it's only happened once where the 16 seed beat the 1 seed. As you go down, the 2 versus the 15, the 2 has won this matchup 93.7% of the time. So if you look at the last column, This translates to about 0.3 of the upsets that you should pick when the 2 beats the 15. So the 15's not going to, you would pick no 15 seeds to move on, no 16 seeds to move on. And if you're feeling a little frisky and risky, you may pick 114 seed since it's at 0.6. Me, myself, I'd stay away from it. But let's get into the next slide. So the next slide really sums it all up, right? The first bullet is you should advance all your 1, 2, and 3 seeds in the first round to the second round. As we saw from the previous slide, the upsets don't really happen in those. And if they do, it's almost a so what. If you're doing a bracket in terms of an office pool where the scoring is set up to be 1.2.4.8.16, you know, the standard bracket strategy, if you miss on a 15 beat in a 2, oh well, just hope it's not a 2 that you have going really far. Next bullet, advance 113 seed, 112 seed, and 111 seed. So that means that you would be plucking away a 4, a 5, and a 6. At least one of them will be getting eliminated in the first round. Also, you're going to want to pick 2 10 seeds and 2 9 seeds to advance. That means 2 8 seeds are going to be eliminated and 2 7 seeds will be eliminated. How do we find this data? Now, like I said before, I look at adjusted net ratings and comparing the matchups in the teams' each respective net rating. You will see a lot of the time when you do have the net ratings for each team, you will see 10 teams have a higher rating than the 7, and it makes it your job a little bit easier when selecting the bracket. Another thing to look at opening day odds. You may see a 10 seed actually have better odds in the betting market and be a favorite to win over a 7 seed, but your bracket indicates that it's an underdog. You have to look out for that. Next, who do we move on to the Sweet 16? Let's first start with the graph. Here it shows you just based on past statistical performance how many higher seeds should advance and how many should be eliminated. As you can see from the 1 seed, they win in the second round at an 84.6% clip, which means you move on all 4. The 2 seeds, they win at a 67.5% clip, which translates to only moving on 3 of them. So now, moving on to your Sweet 16 bracket, you're going to have a 2 seed fall. Number 3, or the 3 seed, sorry. They win at a 61.2% clip, which means that you're going to have only 2 or 3 move on, which means 1 or 2 upsets should happen to the 3 seed. And the same thing with the 4, except you may want to, I think maybe if there's a heavy matchups of 5 versus 4s, you may go 5 instead of 4, and then make it only 1 4 moving on. We'll get further into this, so don't get too bogged down. We'll get further into this as the video goes on. Also, when picking your Sweet 16, know this. Do not go 1, 2, 3, 4 in a region. Why? Because this has happened under 19% of the time in all of March Madness history. Next, have at least one Cinderella team. This is a 10 through 16 seed. So you are going to want to find that 10 seed that we've been telling you, that 10 or 11 seed that moves on, that's going to move on to the Sweet 16. And this happens 94% in all March Madness tournaments, that a Cinderella team moves on to the Sweet 16. Also, have one power conference team seeded 9 or higher move on to the Sweet 16. This is more of the loose trend or the weakest one here, but this has happened every year since 2008, and like I said, probably considered to be the weakest trend. So step 4, how do we go from the Sweet 16 to the Elite 8? Well, you're going to pick 3 1 seeds. to advance. And this has occurred in 91% of all March Madness tournaments. Next, net rating versus net rating. This is where your net ratings take over. It's also the round where the upsets start to dwindle down, so comparing net ratings will be beneficial when determining winners in individual matchups. It's very important as it gets down to the nitty-gritty. Step 5. Step 5 is the road to the Final Four. First bullet, you should eliminate all 12 to 16 seeds. If you have any 12 to 16 seeds, this is where you want to eliminate them. No team seeded 12 or higher or lower, depending how you're saying this, just from 12 to 16, has reached the Final Four in March Madness tournament history. Also, don't go all one seeds. This has only occurred once since 1985. That is a huge stat there. Step 6, picking your teams to go into the final. We're going back to our net rating, net rating, net rating, as the upsets have dwindled down, and now we're just picking those teams who are just some are horses and some are ponies when it comes to the 1s, 2s, and 3 seeds, or whoever's remaining. So applying to the 2023 bracket, this is basically what everybody's been waiting for. So now that we know the analytics mixed with the trends and the angles, how can we apply it to this year's March Madness tournament bracket? Let's find out. Remember step 1, we have to pick our champion. Well, let's start with Alabama. They are rated as the #1 overall team, which has only won at a 16.7% clip in all of March Madness tournaments. So we can eliminate the tide right here on this initial trend or angle. Purdue only meets half of the trends and angles, while Houston and Kansas meet 4 out of the 6. So now we could also eliminate Purdue. Now we're down to Houston and Kansas. And I would be comfortable with anyone going Kansas here, but because Houston meets the offensive and defensive rating parameters, this is what made me select Houston as the 2023 NCAA champion. Now, we're not working completely backwards, but if you're filling out your bracket in front of you right now, you could put, if you're following this is if you're following this, if you're not doing your own picks, you'd put Houston in the championship slot and just keep writing Houston all the way until the first round, almost working backwards, but just for Houston. Okay, we know our champion now. Video is over. See you later. Just joking. Now we get to align the rest of the bracket. Remember when we had our graph showing us how many upsets we should take in the first round and what seeds they should be? Well, this is where this is applied. For my upsets, I select the teams who A, had the better rating or net rating than their opponent. Or B, if this was not applicable, I selected the underdog that was closest to their opponent. So my 113 seed would be Kent State, as their differential was the closest in terms of all the 4 and 13 seed matchups and will be knocking off Indiana. Moving down, my 112 seed upset will be Drake, as their differential was the closest in terms of all the 5 to 12 seed matchups and will be knocking off Miami. For my 11 seed upset, I'll have Mississippi State, as their differential was the closest in terms of all the 6 versus 11 seed matchups, and they will be knocking off Iowa State. We also had Mississippi State winning their play-in game based on having a better net rating than Pittsburgh. The 10 seeds. We have 2 here. There are in fact 2 10 seeds with higher net ratings than their opponents, which made this a little easier, and it was Utah State beating Missouri and Boise State defeating Northwestern. Then for the 9 seeds, there were in fact 2 9 seeds with a higher net rating than their opponents, which were West Virginia beating Maryland and Auburn defeating Iowa. Okay, so how do we select who moves on to the Sweet 16? Well, first, all the 1 seeds should move on. How about the 2 seeds? Well, only 3 twos should be moving on. Well, which one did we select to get knocked out? That would be number 2, Marquette, losing to number 7, Michigan State, because this was our closest net rating differential for all 2 seed matchups. Next, we should have only 2 to 3 seeds moving on. Here, we had 2 only moving on, because we had number 6, Kentucky beating Kansas State, and Mississippi State defeating number 3, Xavier, as those were the 2-3 seed matchups that were closest in differential as well. Next, we have 1 to 3 fours moving on. In this instance, we only have 2, as San Diego State will be moving on based on having a better net rating than Virginia, who was a 4 seed, and we also had St. Mary's pulling off the upset versus UConn based on 2 things: having the closest rating differential, and also the next bullet, which we pointed out, that we cannot have a 1, 2, 3, 4 in a region. Next, remember we wanted to select our Cinderella team. Well, it looks like Drake has become our Cinderella team. They would be knocking off Kent State, which would be an underdog from the previous round, but based on having a higher net rating. Now, who was our Power Conference team? Well, our Power Conference team is Mississippi State, beating Xavier, like mentioned above, as they were the lone Power Conference team with a 9 seed or higher. So after all that mumbo jumbo, this is how we have the Sweet 16, with both the seeds and the net ratings listed for each of the teams in each of the regions. As you can see, in the South, we still have Alabama as the 1 seed, the 5 seed San Diego State, 3 seed Baylor, 2 seed Arizona. In the East, we have Purdue at 1, Tennessee at 4, Kentucky at 6, Michigan State at 7. In the Midwest, we have Houston at 1, Drake at 12, Mississippi State at 11, and Texas at 2. In the West, we have Kansas at the 1, St. Mary's of California at the 5 seed, Gonzaga at the 3, and UCLA at the 2. Now, how do we move on from here, from the Sweet 16 over to the Elite 8? Well, the analysis showed we should be advancing 3 number 1 seeds and avoiding 4 1 seeds in the Final Four. So as you can see in the East, this is where we have our first 1 seed falling to Tennessee, with the rest of the 1 seeds moving on, when we then compare net ratings for all the other matchups. So as you can tell from the South, that's our 1 seed Alabama moving on, our 1 seed from the Midwest, which is Houston, moving on. We mentioned that underdog of Tennessee beating Purdue, and then Kansas is moving on. For the other matchups, it's simply just net rating. Arizona defeats Baylor because of a better net rating, Texas defeating Mississippi State based on a better net rating, Kentucky beating Michigan State, and then UCLA defeating Gonzaga. Well, with all that said, we already know our champion, and the rest can basically be set out on net ratings. As you can see, Alabama has a better net rating than Arizona, so we move Alabama over to the Final Four. Where Tennessee has a better net rating than Kentucky, so they move over to face Alabama. The 1 versus 2 seed with Houston and Texas, we already selected Houston as our champion, so they automatically move over. And then Kansas loses to UCLA, who has a higher net rating, making your Final Four Alabama at 1, Tennessee at the 4, Houston at 1, and UCLA at 2. So finally, we have come to the end of the road, where we have already predetermined our champion, and we are just completing the rest of the bracket based on net rating versus net rating. We have done our due diligence in crossing all of our T's and dotting all of our I's to make sure we have reached our criteria in each round and have come up with a very solid bracket. So as you can see, just going on net rating, Alabama will defeat Tennessee, Houston will defeat UCLA, and then Houston will then defeat Alabama, making Houston the champion. So I'd just like to lay out something before I move forward, and if you guys use this criteria but with different net ratings, you might have a different bracket. So when you've already selected your champion, say for instance, just for the sake of the argument, UCLA had a better net rating than Houston, you still don't change that. Houston would still be defeating UCLA because your champion has already been predetermined based on the angles and the trends of the 1 seeds and their probability of winning the whole thing. So that's it for this video. Now you have all the information that you need to pick the winner of your March Madness bracket and make this one of the easiest tournaments that you ever selected. Thank you so much for watching Grandstand Sports Data. Make sure you subscribe, give us a like, also comment and also share, with all of your friends so that they can get in on this March Madness fun. Let us know in the comments below if you would like more of this content, and until next time, thank you again for watching.